Cire 2018.
Recibámoslo con un fuerte aplauso al señor Welch.
Good morning. On behalf of London Fire Brigade and our Fire Commissioner, I'd like to thank you very much for the invite to come and talk at the conference today. What I'd like to talk to you about this morning is the fire we had on 14th of June last year, the largest fire that London Fire Brigade has ever had to deal with in its history, the largest deployment of breathing apparatus in the history of the British Fire Service, and the largest rescue operation we've had since the Second World War. What it meant to me was it was a day that I will never forget. I was on call. I was woken up at 18 minutes past 1 in the morning to be told of a flat fire in a tower block in West London. I was asked to attend as a tactical advisor, but when I arrived, it very quickly became apparent that actually I was becoming the incident commander. I took charge of the incident just before 2 a.m. And then shortly after that I was relieved of command by somebody more senior than I. And then I was detailed as a fire sector commander inside the building for the next 10 hours. So to tell you about the Grenfell Tower, the Grenfell Tower is on Lancaster West Estate, which is an area in West London. It's part of London Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, which is the richest borough in the UK. It's a 24-storey residential high-rise building, and it only had one staircase, and that staircase was just over 1 metre wide, and that caused us a lot of problems as the incident went on. It's a single staircase construction, and on the ground floor there was a creche, nursery, youth club, and there's a boxing club there. So the actual flats themselves didn't start until the next floor up. There's 129 flats in the building. They were mainly 1- and 2-bedroom flats from the 4th floor and above. 3- and 4-bedroom flats were on the 1st, 2nd and 3rd floor. And as I say, it is in London Borough, Kensington and Chelsea. That is the richest borough in the country, and that became part of the issue, as I'll explain. It was designed in 1967. It was built between 1972 and 1974, 24 stories, and it is a brutalist architecture. It's a square concrete building. In 2014 to 2016, they carried out an extensive refurbishment, which the sole purpose of that really was to make the building look more attractive to the eye. There was 9 further flats added as part of that recent refurbishment, which were on the lower floors. This is a typical layout for Grenfell Tower. It's got 6 flats on each floor of 1- and 2 bedrooms. The central staircase and the lift area was in the middle of the building. That's what it looked like before the refurbishment, and you can see that afterwards it was made to look a lot more attractive, and it was made to look more attractive by placing a cladding on the outside of it. That made it a lot more aesthetically pleasing, but unfortunately that cladding was the thing that caused us the issue on the night of the 14th of June. So the incident itself, our first call came at 00:54 hours, and we were called to a fire in a flat 16, which is the 4th floor. The owner of the flat called us, gave us some very good details of what the incident was. We believe it may have been an electrical appliance that started the fire. We immediately dispatched 2 machines from North Kensington, 1 pump ladder and 1 pump. The main difference really for that is the pump ladder will tend to be more of a rescue machine, and the pump will be the guys that do all the work running around. We also sent a pump ladder from Kensington Station and 1 pump from Hammersmith. That was mobilised when we confirmed that it was actually a high-rise fire that we were dealing with. The first 2 fire engines arrived in the first 5 minutes. In London, we try and get a first fire engine anywhere in London within the first 6 minutes, and the further fire engines will follow within 8 minutes. Oh, is it gone? So we took a total of 390 emergency calls. Some of those were from within the block, and a lot of those were from surrounding blocks. It's a very heavily populated area. We took 197 fire survival guidance call, and what that is when somebody is in their property and they can't get out due to heat or smoke, they will contact the fire, dial 999, which is equivalent of your 112, and our operators will give them the best advice they can to stay in their flat, blocking up the door, bottom of the doorways, get into a place of safety within their flat, and then they will inform the fire ground, the incident commander, of what flat they're in, how many people are in that flat, and we will detail crews to go and rescue those people. The most that London Fire Brigade's ever had in one incident was 6 fire survival guidance calls. That night we took 197. They were all individual calls. Unfortunately, because of the number of calls we were getting, our own control room wasn't capable of managing all those calls. So some of those calls were sent to other control rooms across the whole country, as far away as Scotland, which is maybe some 500 or 600 miles from where we were. We still managed all of our resources. London managed all resource mobilisations. We had one extra appliance that came from Cire Fire Service, which helped us. It was a longer rescue ladder. And with this, we still had to maintain effective emergency cover across London throughout the incident. So although we had a very large incident going on, we still had to maintain that we've still got the rest of London to protect. When I arrived at the incident, it was shortly before 2 a.m. I took charge of the incident and declared it a major incident, which for us is a big deal. It involves lots of all the other agencies, and I then asked for 40 fire engines to attend. So 0059, our first 2 fire engines arrived, so they were there within the first 5 minutes. 0102, with fire and smoke could be seen externally, and that's when we started getting a lot of calls from neighbours and surrounding areas. It was the middle of June, so it's very rarely we have a nice summer in the UK, but actually this was quite a nice day. So windows were open, which helps the fire spread even quicker. 0104, the bridgehead was established on the 2nd floor. And for us, the bridgehead is a point where anyone who goes past the bridgehead must be wearing breathing apparatus. Anything below the bridgehead is what we call safe air. At 0107, the first breathing apparatus crews, 0107, first breathing apparatus crews enter flat 16 on the 4th floor. 0108, the next 2 fire engines attended. So by 0108, we had the 4 fire engines there. At 0111, our 2nd BA team enter flat 16. And at 0112, incident commander can see that fire spreading up the outside of the building. It took 12 minutes from the time the fire got out of the window on the 4th floor to the time that the fire was alight on the 23rd floor, in just 12 minutes. 12 minutes past 1, our incident commander at the time asked for six fire engines and 1 aerial appliance. The purpose of the aerial appliance was trying to get up as high as it could to fight the fire that was on the outside of the building. For us, this was quite a unique fire. We're used to fires inside buildings, and it's not that unusual that a window will fail and it will get out. And the fire will try and get back in the building to try and search for more fuel. This is the first fire that I've ever had, certainly, where the fuel was the outside of the building. At 0119, we asked for 8 pumps, 8 fire engines. 0121, the fire in the flat 16 was actually put out. And the crews that had put that fire out were sending messages back to the incident commander outside to tell him that the fire was out. What they couldn't see was actually it was running up the outside of the building. At 0124, we asked for 10 appliances. So you can see within 12 minutes, we've already asked for 10 appliances. 3 minutes later, we asked for 15 and 2 aerial appliances. And 2 minutes after that, we asked for 20 and FRUs 2. FRUs are fire rescue unit. And what we use that for, they don't carry any water on board. They carry extended duration breathing apparatus, so they can work, in theory, twice as long as a standard duration breathing apparatus set. but they carry a lot of cutting equipment, so they can make access to areas that maybe we don't carry the equipment on a normal fire engine. 0206, I asked for 40 fire engines and declared the incident a major incident. Certainly, that's the only time in my career that I've attended an incident where I've asked for 40 fire engines. It was a multi-agency response, and that by the time, because of declaring it a major incident, all the other agencies get involved, and it was vital on this night that we had other agencies involved. When I arrived, there was somewhere in the region of maybe 100 people outside. Some of those people were on their phones to loved ones, friends or family who were actually stuck in the block, and they're trying to pass us the phones to talk to the people inside. We set up a whole unit just to deal with those fire survival guidance calls. But the other issue we had, of course, is the people outside were trying to get in. We had people who'd got out who were now trying to get back in to rescue friends and family. So it was absolutely essential that we had the help of the police and other organisations. So the Metropolitan Police were there. They declared it a major incident also for themselves. London Ambulance Service, they were there, including their specialist hazardous area response teams. They declared it a major incident. And the London Ambulance's appraisal of the situation when we were bringing casualties down the building and down to the ground floor in the foyer, the London Ambulance actually their staff wouldn't actually enter the building because they felt it was too dangerous to come into that building. So we were then having to ferry the casualties out of the building. That gave us our own hazards in itself, in that we had so much falling debris from the outside of the building that it was very dangerous coming in and out. So people coming in and out of the building was kept to a minimum. And we had spotters around the building watching, and they were telling people when they could enter and when they couldn't. Sadly, we also had people jumping out of that building. And all these are all hazards for us as firefighters trying to get in and out. The local authority liaison officer we asked for, and what their role is, they work for the local council because we had an awful lot of people that were going to need rehousing, not just from Grenfell Tower, but also neighbouring blocks. Because it quickly became apparent that this was going to be an incident that had a huge loss of life. And we didn't want people who were living in blocks facing Grenfell Tower to remain in place. We wanted them out of their houses. We asked for a dangerous structure engineer. I asked for that quite early on, and the reason for that being that we were quite unsure of the stability of the building. And at that point, I had something like around 150 to 200 firefighters inside the building. And what I had to make sure was actually, it was absolute priority for me that those firefighters that came into the building actually went home that night. Because, as we all know, we are the rescuers. And if something happens to us, who rescues the rescuers? We asked for the railway incident officer. This was almost like a perfect storm. We had a railway line running very close to it. We had an underground subway running very close to it. We asked for the National Police Air Service. The purpose of that was try and get images from above, so we could see from above the fire. And they can link it straight down to our command unit. Unfortunately, what also happened on the night was we got a lot of news helicopters there. And I think there is a good point of that they sometimes gave people false hope because people were thinking they were going to be rescued by a helicopter. We've had a lot of questions around why did we not rescue people by helicopter, and I think the easiest way to explain that is if you hold your hand over the top of a candle, you'll feel the heat that will come off of that. If you imagine magnifying that to a building this size, the heat coming off the top of it was vast. The Salvation Army turned out very kindly with other voluntary charity organisations, and what they were really there for was for our welfare. So they come along to our large instance, and they will make sandwiches, they will make tea, coffee, water, to make sure that we're kept hydrated and we're kept fed, so that we can keep going throughout the night. And utility companies, quite early on, I asked for the gas and electric to be switched off for the building because of the risk that it posed to us. Unfortunately, it was something like about 12 hours before we got the gas turned off because it had to be dug up from outside. Because they couldn't it wasn't safe for anyone to access the building to turn each individual flat off. They had to isolate the whole block. You can see from this, I don't know if you can see, but on the top, the left-hand picture, that shows at 0130. This is a view from a CCTV camera locally. At 0210, the centre picture, you can see it's now running up the east side of the building. from the fourth floor right to the roof. And by 02:34, it was pretty much engulfed the whole of the east side. There, on the 0308, that's from the south side of the building. 323 is the middle picture, and 0344 is the one on the right. By this point, we were still in the very early stages of the incident. We managed to reach some of the upper floors. We managed to reach floor 18, 19, and we actually got as far as 21. But as the fire progressed, we couldn't keep getting as high as we wanted to. And we were taking the fire survival guidance calls from people, and when we reached their flats, we found that they'd moved into other flats, another place of safety. One of the flats actually had 22 people in it, in a two-bedroom flat. By 0420, you can see that it's actually spread around all sides of the building. All four sides of the building were alight. And the fire was now coming from the outside in. And it was described by one of my colleagues as it looked like a cheese grater, because there was just holes throughout the building where the entire flats were burnt out. I've never seen a fire become so hot and do such extensive damage as it did on Grenfell Tower. Unfortunately, we didn't manage to reach all the people that were in the building. We lost 72 people that night, 71 on the night. One person died a few months after, and those figures actually include one stillborn child. We rescued 65 people. Obviously, the building actually held about 300, so a lot of people managed to get out beforehand. We physically rescued 65 others from breathing apparatus crews. The single escape staircase was compromised at an early stage, and the reason for that was, as my colleagues from New York were explaining earlier, when we plug in to each floor, unfortunately, the rising main that came in the building ran up the centre of the building. So as we plug into it, we had to leave the door open. The hose kept the door open so we could work the hose up to higher in the building. But unfortunately, what it did was it let all the gases and all the smoke and the products of the fire into the stairwell. So the stairwell very, very quickly became compromised. When I arrived, the bridgehead was on the second floor, and it became quite clear that actually the only way we were going to fight this fire was by moving the bridgehead further and further up the building. Unfortunately, because of the compromise, the way the fire was moving around, I managed to move the bridgehead to the third floor, but very quickly, within 30 minutes, I was told by one of my colleagues that actually we now had a fire in a flat below us on the second floor. So the bridgehead ended up coming down to the ground floor, and all operations were run from there. Unfortunately, what this meant was we had firefighters who were wearing breathing apparatus who were trying to get up 24 floors to rescue people. They were undoubtedly breaking a lot of our procedures. We had to by not putting the mask on until they got to a point where they really needed to. We had firefighters rescuing people and taking their own breathing apparatus off and put it onto casualties so people could walk out in safe air. We have a process in London called firefighter emergency, and it's very similar to the FAST team that my colleague spoke about earlier. And what the firefighter emergency is if we have a firefighter or a person under control of the fire service who's in need of rescuing, so i.e. one of our own has gone down, then we call a firefighter emergency, and that brings a lot more resources to be able to go and rescue our own people. I think up until Grenfell Tower, we'd only ever declared firefighter emergency 3 or 4 times. I declared it 3 times on that one night to go and rescue our own people who had taken their own breathing apparatus off, their own personal protective equipment off, to pass to residents to try and get them out safely. Unfortunately, a lot of the residents we brought out, because of the distance we had to bring them, were unable to survive in that irrespirable atmosphere. And that staircase being only 1 metre wide, you may have noticed I'm not a small person myself, but you get two of us standing next to each other, and that is the width of the staircase. I mean, if you add into that the hoses that go up the staircase, the equipment that goes up the staircase, we've got members of the public running down the staircase. We had about 12 deceased bodies on the staircase. These were all things that were all hampering us on the night. When I turned up there, I asked a colleague to go and do a 360-degree walk around a building and find me the second staircase. And he quickly came back to me and said, there isn't one. I sent him away again and said he was being stupid and he must find out of second staircase. And there was no second staircase. There was just one staircase 1 metre wide. When I arrived, I was told that the fire lift that we would normally take control of wasn't working. If it had been working, I wouldn't have used it, because we use the fire lift to take our crews and our equipment to 2 floors below the fire. At no point on that night could we be 2 floors below the fire. So the lift was never an issue. We could never use that. So anything we did and anything we needed was literally carried up or down the staircase, the single staircase. But when we have people come trying to get down that staircase, residents, and we're trying to get up to reach people we know are trapped, that causes huge issues. We have a policy, it's actually a building policy in the UK, of a stay put policy. And the way that works is if a resident dials 999 to ask to call the fire brigade, we tell them to stay put. Unless the fire or the heat or smoke is in their own flat or apartment, they stay put and we come and get them. That policy always works for us. On this night, we changed that policy. We changed that policy after a couple of hours. I think it was around 2:46 in the morning we changed that policy because we knew we couldn't get to these people. So the policy changed to, if you can get out, then do get out. Unfortunately, the reason that policy doesn't get changed normally is because if somebody's ringing us, it's because they're trapped, because they can't get out. And that becomes a fire survivor guidance call. There was on that night, we changed that policy, we changed that advice and told people to get out if they could. Unfortunately, most of them couldn't. As we say, it says there, extremely difficult and arduous conditions inside the tower. We had issues of heat exhaustion where firefighters I've never seen people who were so close to death who weren't actually dead, and that was our firefighters. When they were coming down, there were several of them that were collapsed, several of them were carried down. But as we're all the same as firefighters, we won't stop, we keep going. There was a point in the evening or in the early hours of the morning where I had to stop firefighters from going above the 15th floor because physically they just couldn't get above, they couldn't break through that heat barrier. Where the fire was wrapping around the building, it was converging at one point, and between the 11th and 15th floor was estimated to be 250 degrees hotter than the rest of the building. And that was the heat barrier they couldn't break through. Until we'd managed to deal with that heat barrier, lower the temperature, then we could carry on. Unfortunately, that took us some time and had a very detrimental effect on the residents living above it. We also had issues where we couldn't get very close to the building because of the falling debris. We had fire engines that were actually having debris falling onto them that was alight. So we were continuing moving some of our trucks because there was a threat of them catching light. We had issues of firefighters getting injured from falling embers. I'm proud to say, although we had something in the region of about 50 injuries, they were all quite minor injuries. They were mainly small burns. We had one firefighter who had an injured shoulder when somebody jumped out from the 9th floor and landed on their shoulder, on a firefighter's shoulder. But so we couldn't get close to the tower with our appliances. We only had one staircase to get up and down, and we had to ferry casualties out of the building, carrying them out. In the end, we asked for the police tactical support group, and they came along with their riot shields, and they used them as a shield above our heads as we went in and out of the building. So in the first 8 hours, 7 hours and 6 minutes, we had over 450 firefighters and senior officers attended the incident. We had 61 fire engines attended, and 7 command units, 14 fire rescue units, 4 aerial appliances, and 3 urban search and rescue modules. That is more or less 50%, it's half of the London Fire Brigade resources. And then we were getting to a point where we were very close to asking for mutual aid and mutual assistance from neighbouring fire services. Thankfully for us, it was quite a quiet night around the rest of London. But if we'd have had another large incident going on, then it would have really stretched us to maintain protection across London. Our urban search and rescue modules there, what they come along for, it was twofold really. Initially, it was because we had serious fears of the building collapsing. We didn't expect the entire building to collapse, but we expected some sort of pancake collapse. We might get individual floors collapse onto the next one. But they were also used then, they were used by the disaster victim team to try and locate casualties. Imagine the heat inside this building in its highest points reached twice the heat of a crematorium. So the remaining parts were very, very small. It was ash. So we were using our dogs for that. We had 50 USAR firefighters, urban search and rescue firefighters, and the trained dogs. Some of those, they weren't all our dogs. Some dogs came from other fire brigades. What I will say is the offers of help and assistance that we had, not just from fire service in the UK, but from all around the world, was absolutely overwhelming. It really did bring us all together as one fire service family, no matter where in the world you were. So in total, we had over 1,000 fire service personnel attending Grenfell Tower in the first 4 days of the incidents. We had a 20-pump relief at 04:30 in the morning, which means for the first 20 machines that were there, the intention was that they got away. They were relieved by the fresh machines. The biggest problem we had as commanders was that our firefighters wouldn't leave. They refused to leave. They wanted to stay and do more, which was admirable. But it also gave us the issue of we had some very, very tired people there to a point where it wasn't safe for them to be recommitted into the building. So they were used for other jobs externally. You can see from that picture there, these are the concrete columns inside the building. And you can see the damage that it's done, that the fire is done. Certainly around on the right-hand side, you can see that some of the structural beams are actually bent. So we had floors that were actually slowly coming down on top of others. And you could hear it throughout the night. You could hear the building making some very strange noises. And certainly as a commander, as a fire sector commander within the building, I think we reached a point where we were convinced the building was going to come down at some point. And I had a conversation with 2 or 3 other colleagues of the same rank. And what we said was, if we die, then we're going to die trying. And that was the view of every single firefighter that was in that building. There was points where we were committing firefighters to areas above the fire, which is an absolute no-no for us. We're sending firefighters above the fire with no firefighting media, no water, and no communications. We lost communications within the building. It was really interesting listening to my American colleagues earlier on and their communications systems that they use, which I'd like to talk to more about maybe later. But I think as firefighters, we know if we lose communications, we kind of lose all control. Unfortunately, on this night, we lost communications. Once people left the bridgehead and reached about 2 floors away, we had no communication between us and the breathing apparatus crews. So we weren't getting reports back quickly enough of what was happening to the building. It very quickly became apparent that this was no longer a firefighting operation, it was a rescue operation. Trying to put the fire out was a lost cause. We could never put that fire out. We couldn't chase it quick enough. We couldn't reach the top of it. We don't have area appliances that high. So it purely became a rescue operation of just trying to get the people out and letting the building burn. But what we were faced with was the issue of these concrete columns that were starting to fail. And there was times when we had discussions about withdrawing from the building because of the danger of collapsing, and we decided to stay, and we would just do the best we could for the most that we could, as quick as we could. Our urban search and rescue teams came in and started to shore up the building, and because we had ceilings that were starting to collapse, they were trying to hold it up while our disaster victim teams were in there, and they were literally searching the floor with a small dustpan and brush, just looking for remains, so they could try and piece together how many people were in that building that night. So they went through every single flat. You can see the damage in that picture on the right there, the damage there. There was no windows left. There was no furniture left. Even internal walls had gone. They were just dust. It was just open up completely. And it was quite strange. I went back there about a week after the incident and walked the entire height of the building into every single flat. And it had a really strange feeling about the place with the wind just blowing through it. And it could be seen from miles around. And it was a real priority to get the building covered up, because there was a lot of people in the local area had lost a lot of friends and family from there. So it was a real priority for us to get that covered up. So we actually sent our stop message, which is our message to say that we no longer require any more resources, On the 27th of June, at 13:45 hours, it was 13 days and 12 hours, 51 minutes after the initial call. Now, what that stop message does is it explains to everyone else that the fire's out and we don't need any more resources. But we remained at the scene for many months after that, doing our fire investigation, trying to work out initially how the fire started in flat 16 on the 4th floor and how the fire spread so quickly up the outside of that building at a cost of 72 lives. Our fire engineering teams were there for a long time afterwards to actually look at what caused it, what was the makeup of the building, and we're currently in the middle now of a public inquiry through this. The inquiry and the criminal investigation around it is expected to last somewhere in the region of 5 years before we actually be able to account for how and why this happened. As you imagine, it had a massive impact on the firefighters that were there. We've had several firefighters that have tried to take their own lives since because of what they saw that night. We've got a high number of firefighters who are still receiving counselling. So we immediately, straight afterwards, implemented a psychological support plan based on a watchful waiting protocol. And we very quickly recognised that what firefighters have seen that night was extreme. And it's, from a personal aspect, it's something that I think nobody should ever have to see, and I hope no one else ever has to see it again. But what it also does is, when you've got firefighters or staff that have spent many years doing in this line of work, it can sometimes just be enough just to tip people over the edge, and it has a real impact on the trauma that they've seen across their whole careers. Immediately after the incident, every single firefighter that attended that incident was sent to one large fire station where they wrote notes of what had gone throughout the night, and then they were given the opportunity to go and sit with the counsellors, talk about it. Some took that opportunity, some didn't. So within a week after the incident, 1 to 7 days after the incident, everyone involved was contacted by telephone and offered additional help. Now that's a massive job for what was quite a small counselling and wellbeing team. On our internal internet, we were putting coping strategies up there. We were asking people to contact us if they thought that they were struggling with it. It's fair to say we've still got a lot of people still struggling with what happened that night. We had station debriefs. We also used other fire service. Tyne and Weir Fire Service came and helped us, come and talk to our staff, because although we've got a lot of staff suffering, it's amazing to say that that next night duty, there was not one person that went sick. Every single firefighter that attended that fire came back to work the next day. Unfortunately, we have had some sickness levels rise recently due to the impact of trauma on individuals. We then had a 28-day follow-up between the 13th and 15th of July, 6th and 9th of August, where attendees were visited the welfare centres. We had to set up satellite welfare centres just to look after our staff. And actually, as a result of that, what we've now done is expanded our counselling and wellbeing team. So we now recognise the impact that not just this incident, but many other incidents have. As I started off by saying, it was the largest fire that London Fire Brigade dealt with since the Second World War. It's the only fire in my whole career I wish I hadn't attended. I wish I'd missed it. But it was also the proudest night of my career. I've never seen people work so hard, so consistently for so long, ever. And that in itself made me very proud. If I never achieve anything else in my first fire service career, what I did achieve that night was every firefighter that went into that building went home to their families that night. And that for me is enough. That's it in my presentation. Thank you very much for listening.
That's it here. That's it here.
Okay.
Cire 2018.